Welcome back, everyone, to Living Your Greatness. My name is Ben Mummy, and I'm super excited to welcome back Peter Grandich, who I consider to also call not just a mentor, but even a friend. Peter, how are you doing today?
Dick, always to be with you, Ben.
Always good to be with you too, Peter. And I was just telling you earlier that I was able to finish reading your book. I was at a cafe in Montreal. It's called September Cafe, and just really, really enjoyed reading the book and just want to say to not just hearing about your passions of both finance and faith, but most importantly, your compassion to leaning into love over fear. What was like your reason for writing that book and being so vulnerable?
So what you have is the sixth edition, and the first edition, which I never thought was going to occur at the time. A young lady that had done all my marketing and internet stuff. She said that your story should be put out there. You know what you've gone through, and that I think the first one was 2010 or 11 when the first edition came out. Of course, a lot happened since then. That's why there's six editions. But there was no thought of selling it for a profit or anything. And I said, listen, I have no time to write a book. She says, I'll write it. I already know most of your story. I've been working for you for almost 10 years. I know everything. Okay, let's try it. And that was the motivation. And then early on, even before I think even the second edition came out, because of some of the things that I had spoken up until that time, which a lot of people just don't speak about. Most people do not talk about making and losing millions. Most people don't talk about having such depression that you lost the will to live. Most people don't talk about going from a 5,000 square foot home on 5 acres to a two-bedroom condo on the third floor and start to learn how to spell humble. So those were the things that really generated. And then as life went on, it took more of a meaning because I would more engross myself in my Catholic Christian faith. I would wear it on my sleeve. And then I think the other thing that generated it, Ben, was in 2000, I began working with professional athletes through Christian sports ministry. And the sports athlete stuff just opened people's eyes. You could go down, and I think it would work whether it's in Canada, US. You could announce at a school or even a place of employment and say, there's a famous doctor here or a famous lawyer. Nobody's coming running down, maybe a few. Announce some professional athlete is there, and a lot of people come running down. So because of what happened with athletes and then what happened in sports because of faith and social issues hitting sports and political, it all served a purpose, up until as you and I speak today. But I did tell you before we started, the sixth edition is the final edition, no matter what else happens. But it served a great human interest purpose far more than anything from a business standpoint. So it's all good.
Something that I loved about it is it's beyond just lessons for finance or even for faith. There's a lot of humanity in it in terms of, really, really, again, being vulnerable and really showing all layers of who you are. Um, I would love to touch on, I feel a lot of people can relate where sometimes financial stress, can be very stressful. Um, and, even in today, when we think about all the big problems that, you and I have spoken about many times, or even with other guests, that are huge concerns, debt and everything like that. But also we sometimes forget how that impacts our emotional well-being or even other layers of our life where life itself is just so it can be really tough. It can be really hard, whether that's our relationships or the environment or the household that we grew up in. So I would love to get more of your opinion. And before we even go to finance today, what's your opinion on that in terms of just how you've been able to navigate through some of those Phoenix stories in your life and really come out on the other side?
So as part of the story really is I did not get into my faith until the year 2000. And then it would progress and become more aggressive. And what would come of that is, for me at least, the Holy Bible became the manual of life. And not that it was toss everything else aside from the secular world, but that was the foundation. And whether the book is the word of God or just a bunch of people that somehow got together and came up with a great story or somewhere's in between, one of the most important things, which surprises people until they actually look at it with these eyes, is how much of it is about matters of finance. Half the parables, the most famous authoritations from Jesus, are parables, and half of them are related to that. There's more verses in the scripture about matters of money and finance than there is about what you would think is the ultimate two topics, heaven or hell. And so for me, and as I studied it, uh, it became a basis of conducting both my business and personal life. Now, on the business end, it opened doors, but it also had doors slammed shut in your face as bad. For some, people want no part of that because either they're atheist or agnostic most of the times. Then there are people that may be believers of that faith or others, but believe you're one of the many, many people over history who are really charlatans, who are only using that in a way to sell some wares or goods and all. But then there's a group of people who feel a sense of, I don't want to say trustworthiness because they don't know you yet, but they feel that, like you said, the openness. I don't hear this from other people. It's not something very common in the financial service world. In fact, the financial service world, I can attest to it, refer not to include anything spiritual. In fact, when I first decided to tie business with my faith in 2000, I had met this professional athlete that had played for the New York Giants football team. He had come to me and said he felt God sent to me to form this financial management company for Christian athletes. And I went to the present group that I was associated with. And the guy who was in charge said, listen, you could put a rock on the door, you could put a bull or a bear, but you're not putting God's door. You got to keep that stuff to yourself. It doesn't mix on Wall Street. And for the most part, he was right. It's not something that's very common. Not to say that there aren't a few firms that tie faith. There are funds that do that now. And there are many, many individuals working within the financial service industry. But it's not a very common thing. So it was getting scripture, getting and grounded in it, practicing what you preach, being open to talk about as much of the bad stuff as you do the good stuff. You know, sometimes I'll just say this, Ben, and then I'll shut up at your next question. But sometimes you would think most financial people never lose money based on what you hear will come out of them. But losing money and making mistakes and suffering great troubles because of it is far more common than most people declare in my business.
I hear you, Peter. And it's funny that you brought up to that finance and spirituality, you know, on Wall Street at least, has always made it seem separate. When really I find when you look at the whole human approach of who we are, they're all interconnected. Our spiritual well-being, our financial well-being, emotional well-being, physical, et cetera, et cetera. And when I think about some of the most inspiring, at least in my opinion, financial voices in the world or people that I've met, they're actually very spiritually connected to themselves. A good example is, you know, a common friend that we have, Michael Gentile. I would even say Daniela Camboni. When you really, really get to know who they are, they really know thyself. And I think that's such an important thing to know yourself, because that translates into how you show up, your values and your decision-making, and how you show up to others as well.
So Wall Street, along with Madison Avenue, knowingly or unknowingly, have basically said, I think for over 100 years, but for certainly on modern time, a theme undertone that more money equals more happiness. If we could help you get that and tie it in with all the things at Madison Avenue through advertisements and all that, look how happy you are when people have more things and, you know, things of that nature and all. And it is a unfortunate false nomer that works. So the philosophy would be that the guy driving the bus could never be as happy as the guy that owns the bus company. Well, let me just tell you, after dealing with some wealthy people, but particularly very wealthy athletes, some of the most happiest people I've met is people that do mission work in a city, And some of the most unhappy people were those very people, including those athletes who reached. First of all, if you think of a wealthy athlete, they scored on two fronts. A, but they may not believe it, but God blessed them with such a talent to do something that 99.9% of other men and women can't do to their level, and then get paid well for it. And, uh, it, and yet they, classic stories we could talk through the evening. And I can tell you just from the ones that I met, where unhappiness became the final verdict of what happened in their life and so forth and so on. So that false nomer, and again, those are the warnings. And one of the things, and I don't know where you wanted to go, and I don't want to take you off your road, but one of the biggest things I've learned in all of that, there's not a positive verse in scripture for debt. In fact, there's much warnings about it. And I believe if we look at all the issues from government to businesses to individuals, debt is a net negative. And it is something that has grown. It's become more common. My parents never had a credit card, but certainly not their parents. But this indebtedness that we've come on all levels is basically perhaps one of the biggest negatives. And ironically, there's only warnings in scripture about it. Now, there is some scripture where it is taught that if you are the creditor to help those debtors, but there's tremendous warnings about it. And, the greatest, wealthiest person in historic in scripture is King Solomon. And they say King Solomon's wealth would be equal to 1,000 Warren Buffetts now. So if you think about how wealthy that must have been, and even his wealth eventually got him as well. But he had a couple of things that really kept him grounded for most of his life. You talked about it, about mentioning some good people you've met that you really feel are good all around. He always said good counsel. He also said helping others, being charitable, doing the good services and all. There's a lot of that in scripture. And quite frankly, scripture gives another good warning, Ben, and that is when Jesus talks about how difficult it is for the rich person. The rich man's story is one of my favorites because it really is about a guy that comes along, hears such good things, asks, what do I got to do to get in? When he first hears it's something that's been commonly told at that point, practice the 10 Commandments, et cetera, et cetera. I'm in, where do you sign? And then when Jesus says to him, well, wait, one more thing. I want you to go home. I want you to have a great garage sale, sell everything you have, whatever you don't have, put it on eBay, take all the money and give it to the poor and join me. And we know suddenly they say that he just turns around and leaves sad. And it wasn't that we're called to take all our money and give it to others and all, but we're to have a heart like Mother Teresa has, where possible, doing that. So one of the other things that you'll find, I believe, if you looked into the souls of the Gentiles and Daniela's and hopefully Peter Grandich and others, you'll find that they do as much as they can, not as little as they can, to help others or are less fortunate. I think that's a very important thing in a society now that has become mostly me, myself, and I.
I hear you on that. I know you've been part of educating people about this financial awakening to help people really be aware of, you spoke about debt. But I also see right now, and maybe I'm biased on this, but I also see a huge movement of a spiritual awakening. People slowly starting to come back to themselves. I would love to get your opinion on what's your opinion on both this financial and spiritual awakening, and do you think there's a relationship between the two?
Well, no holds bar is always the way I do interviews. And there's no reason to not do it, especially you've been gracious enough to talk about subjects that a lot of people don't want to talk about. So why I believe that's occurring is, and why we have a lot of the challenges before us, and we've had it all our lives, but they become more acute, is that's because there's been a spiritual warfare since Christ's coming resurrection. And the other side has gotten some great weapons. It's been able to enhance its side and what it's trying to achieve. And yet, thankfully, because of how much more it's risen, there are people being touched and recognizing, whether clearly or just feeling that emotion, and have trying to do good versus bad. And so it's a spiritual battle that has always existed, but it's become acute now. And it also recognizes both sides, if, so to speak, how money plays a role in that. You know, when you see some statistics, first divorce, and I can only speak in the United States, but I suspect it's in Canada and the rest of the world, more divorces were because of matters of finance over anything else, even lust, it's some, and and that's how critical it demonstrates how money is. There's an old saying, I never met a person on their deathbed that said, I just wish I worked more, earned more money, and spent less time with my family and friends and all that kind of stuff. So that's one of the things I think that's happening. And the lines are being drawn because the battle is becoming more in depth, and we're seeing more forces of evil outright in the open now versus how maybe it worked a couple of generations ago from behind the scenes. And that's why I think some of us are being lifted. I can tell you this much. If someone thinks with all the speaking, the sharing in the book and all, makes more people come through my door, no, it makes less than if I just kept quiet. But the people who do come through the door, Ben, it's so rewarding. It's so much better than if just more people came through just for the sake of money. So it's a challenge now, and it's only going to come more acute because there's so many things in play now that are happening. I'll give you another example that people have yet to speak about, and it's grabbing hold of the youngest of people as early as high school and through college now, and that's the gambling now that people are doing, sports betting as well as prediction stuff and all. It is grabbing people much younger than ever would have happened a generation or two generations ago, and we're seeing more widespread losses, and therefore the impact not only on themselves, but their parents and some of them that maybe started young marriages. It's a disease that's spreading rapidly, clearly supported by government because it generates tax money. And it's another one of many issues now that is causing a lot of problems in the world today.
So Peter, how do we encourage maybe people around the world that maybe, they're caught in that busyness or disconnection from themselves of being spiritually connected, maybe closed-minded? How do we allow a space to really support them on letting go of ego and really leaning into their spiritual awakening? Feel free if you want to share your story or other stories that you've heard, but how do we foster that environment of love so then we can support more people waking up?
Sure. So I can only speak from the Christian end, and I don't ever take my faith and say it's the only one and everybody else is wrong. There are many worthy religions in the world. They share where they're on the right side, where they share common ground. The simplest common grounds are the things like Ten Commandments, moral rights, things of those natures and all. They're common. But one of the things that's troubling now for people is here in the United States, 2 generations ago, it was common to say that the United States is built on and running on Judeo-Christian principles. You went into a court, the commandments were always cleared. People were not afraid to show their religious affection. It was in schools, we pledged allegiance, things of that nature. As that's been removed for whatever choices people had, we've had this relativism take over. That's actually a movement where basically, hey, what everybody ever wants, that's with them. They should be entitled to do it, even if what they do is only in a small 1 or 2%, where 98% are either totally against it or don't want any part of it. You have to accept that now. And that was the door opener. That's what changed things, where that used to be, no, I'm sorry. Majority rules, If you want to do that, do it behind closed doors and all. But now relativism took took hold of this. The other thing, which unfortunately is it's become into the political and social world, and then the sports world. The last world where that division was kept outside the arena or the stadium was the sports world. You could have went to a ball game 30 or 40 years ago, and you would have not been able to pick who's left wing, who's right wing, who's for this, who's not for that, and all. People went to sports because they were able to leave that outside the stadiums. It became so acute in 2020, tied in coincidentally with COVID, that I left the sports world because, I began to be outspoken in 2016 when Colin Kaepernick decided to kneel and ignore what we believed was an appropriate action that we should take for a Pledge of Allegiance and how one should act through it. I spoke about it. I wrote about it. I got interviewed about it. Well, I lost half of my sports clientele from that. Then when COVID came, or even before that, when social issues were being put on and players were forced to talk about or wear things that they may not agree about and so forth and so on, that's when I just decided that, I can't on one arm go around with these guys and fake that I'm kind of with them when I believe so much against the principles of which are being called. And the sports world is only becoming more inundated. We've just had here in the last week a major situation, which is going to go a long way to say how much worse sports could get, where a couple of baseball players for San Francisco Giants who were required to wear a certain type of hat that obviously they didn't agree with what it stood for. They didn't say, rip it up at all, but they just put a little Bible quote and they got in trouble for the Bible quote. So this is becoming more of a battleground. And, if you're a Christian and you read and you believe that you've been already given the insight to what happens at the end, yeah, there's a great battle. Things get a lot worse, but eventually it's all for the good. But I don't think you have to be Christian to have that feeling. I just think you have to have some of the moral principles that most religions have. Now, there's a religion now that has the complete opposite of that. And that's growing more acute around the world. And that's going to become more of a battle scene than people could imagine right now.
Yeah, Peter, something that I want to ask you is I'm really curious. I know how passionate you are about faith and finance. We've spoken a little bit more about even like the relation to spirituality and finance. And I also think it's important too that you just mentioned, everyone's got their own religious beliefs too, but to have those principles and guidelines to properly know who you are and know kind of what are your beliefs and what you stand by. Something that I do want to do is I want to give you the opportunity that I don't think you've ever had before, which is right now, whether it's the financial world, which I know you have such a gift, or whether it is discussing more your faith. Where do you want to go? Where do you want to take this conversation?
I have this philosophy, and again, people think it's degenerate. I'll say people, a handful of people, because you can see it in some of the comment sections when you do interviews. People have no idea what I'm about and all, and make judgments just by a few minutes that you answer some questions to somebody. I just think now that we are seeing, at least here in the U.S., although what little I still listen to in Canada, I used to write a newsletter for several years called North of the Border, long before you and I knew each other. Canada was my second home from home. And maybe I'll touch on that because I used to say, people forget for most of my career, Canada and the U.S. were the two biggest trading partners in the world. And to me, the greatest movie that showed how closeness it was to Canada and the U.S., and if no one's seen it, whether it's a Canadian watching this or an American, and you like either both places, the movie Canadian Bacon. It is an historically funny movie, but tells you really how important it was and how close this Canada was. But this example now of what transpired, where I have friends in Canada that tell me, Pete, we still like you, but we can't stand the United States. And I've had some Americans tell me the same about, Canada. We just had a golfer go up and play golf in the once a year Canadian tournament. He put on a U.S. shirt. Man, some of those people wanted to kill him in that audience and all. And maybe it wasn't proper for him to put that on either. So one of the things I wanted to say is that this division, this social, political, and economic era that I believe America's just entering, its worst ever on all those fronts, is not alone. I think Canada is facing it. I think much of the Western world is facing it. In fact, the EU, in my opinion, is the beginning of the end for it as we knew it. And there'll eventually either be one or more countries look to completely pull out or readjust how they supposedly work together and all. So it's impacting all facets of life, from the simplest working people. But here in the U.S., if you want me to express a pet peeve, is the separation now. Some call it decay economy, but what's really happened, Ben, is the top 1% wealthiest Americans now are wealthier than 60% of what makes up what we call the middle class. The top 10% own 86% of all the assets. The narrowest now of wealth versus the underpinnings of more of the working class or even the working poor has gotten to a point where that 50% that don't own any assets, half of them, or 25% of all American workers now, are using some sort of debit mechanism, whether a credit card debt or buy now or pay later, just to get by on daily, weekly, and monthly needs, food, clothing, rent, etc. And so it's getting worse by the day. And the pull is becoming greater and greater. Yes, some few are making it up to here, but the vast majority have water even higher up now or have gone underwater. And I think that's what's going to lead to far worse crises that we're used to. And unfortunately, the younger you are, the more of that you're going to have to endure that didn't exist at my time, at my age, at that point in time. And that's the big challenge for clearly people 50 and under, and especially even younger than that the things that they're facing. And here's one of the others. And then Ben, please ask, I'll keep going on if you want to ask a question. But the trouble on that is, here's the battle that's going to come. So right now I'm 70 years old. And right now I'm entitled to what's called Medicare in the U.S. I get Social Security. Although we just had our Social Security Trust Fund come out and say, now, 1 year even sooner, it's going to go bankrupt and we're going to see across the board cuts as early as 6 years from now. Well, right now, 60% of all the people that collect Social Security, it's their only source of income. So for them, if it's cut, how do they go on? 60-something% of Americans are working paycheck to paycheck. A similar percentage don't have 1,000 saved. So my concern is the everyday life, forget about stocks or gold stock, but just everyday life for the majority of people is becoming extremely hard on all fronts. And in a few years' time from now, it's going to become dramatically harder. And I think from what little I still read about Canada, Canada has similar problems too. So North America, and we'll just put it together that way, has an awful picture once we get past a year or two down the road. And I don't see it getting better. I see it having to get a lot worse before any real movement can that's going to happen. So let me give you that last example that I wanted to give to you. So I'm 70. And please God, if I live 10 or 15 years, I'm expecting my first grandchild next week. So now I have this real desire. I want to live 10 or 15 more years. I want to see the child make it to teenage or whatever the case may be. So I'm at 80 or 85 now, 10 or 15 years from now, and things go the way it seems. Social Security isn't as much. Medicare has been revamped and all, but I'm still entitled to go and get a new heart or whatever it may be so I can live a couple more years. And it's going to cost hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars. And there's going to be a young guy. How old are you, Ben?
I'm 32.
Okay. He's 32 at that time, 35, working, just got married, maybe has a couple kids. Every single penny of his is just going to just get by to the next day. He's not able to save because of all. He's going to naturally say, well, wait a second. You're going to take more of my tax dollars for this old geezer Grandich, who's had a great life and everything, just so he can have an operation. What, for another year? No. So one of the battles that's not yet been formed, but it's the undertones of being formed, is a battle of the ages. And it'll be a battle of the classes too. And all of that is going to be addressed and decided based on people's beliefs or non-beliefs. So if compassion doesn't become more widespread and it becomes more secular or self-interest, or the me, myself, and I society that exists a lot out there in the secular world, these things are going to become acute crisis and all. And no one wants to talk about that or prepare about that. Look, I meet people that come in for planning with us, okay? And I say to them, listen, past 5 years from now, I'm going to tell you, don't put on your piece of paper counting Social Security as potentially your income. And here's a challenge for that. That medical studies now say if there's two people 65 years old right now, there's a 1 in 4 chance at least one of them is going to live to 100. 35 years of retirement. Do you know how much capital and things you have to build up in order to be sufficient to live out that period? Most people aren't going to do that. That's why, at least here in the States, Ben, when you're going in stores or retail or whatever it may be, and you see a 75 or 80 or 85-year-old person working, they're not working because they got nothing else to do. They're working because they have to work. And the challenge is to work. Take this from me. When somebody told me when I turned 70 back in April, Ben, hey, don't worry, Pete, 70's the new 60. I got news for you, Ben. 70's 70. I remember 60. Things are already harder to do at 70 than they were at 60. So I just think when you said about things to talk about, I don't think people, when they're even doing planning, they're willing because no one's willing to talk about some of the things that you and I just spoke about. They just see the world that they either turn on their TV or the younger turn on their computer and watch these programs. But all these things are going to impact the vast majority of people down the road.
That's exactly why I wanted to go there with you, Peter. I think all generations are important. All people are important. Colors of skin, everything. I think you know that about myself. I really want to keep helping so many people across the world. But something that really hit me when I was listening to you is the reality that there is this constant right now surviving mentality. When I look around, not everyone, but a lot of people that I speak to, you know, whether it's from all the different communities and ecosystems that I'm part of. And so that's always a big thing for me that I keep hearing is in challenging times right now, like financially, the 20s that maybe you lived, it's not only the 30s nowadays. It's even like, I would even say like the new 20s is almost like the late 30s and early 40s. Some people are even more nervous about having families or getting married to someone because there's so much fear right now with this whole survival mode. I know you've done so much financial planning and think about all these other aspects that are not always talked about. What would be something if you were looking at myself, I'm in my 30s, or even like your daughter, right? And you have a grandchild, you know, that's going to come soon. Congrats. What are some things of like, how do you advise, you know, a plan?
So the family life, and again, I can only speak here for the States, changed dramatically. One, because when I grew up 55, 60 years ago, there was 2 to 3 generations living in the typical family, whether it was a great uncle or great grandpa or whatever. And it was kind of took care of each other. There was not across the board where you went into assisted living or a nursing home, only for really acute stuff. Things like that were taken at home. Now, part of the problem with seniors wasn't because the average age wasn't living to the level where the body starts to go really bad. It's one of the reasons why now we have so much more dementia and all, because people are living longer and those things that go wrong with that happen with that and all. But the big issue now is there's a couple here in the States. One, we have here, I'm in the 55 and over community. And I've seen, and I was just telling my wife earlier that in July, we'll be here 17 years. And of course, the people that were my age now, if they're still around, most of them had very bad health problems. And then the cost of that and so forth. The big joke here is, or I like to joke, is there's only 3 topics if I go down to the clubhouse, which are going to be spoken about: politics, sports, and medical. And the medical is normally the popular of the 3. So for seniors, people of that age, there's a couple of things impacted them. One, we've had a lot of the seniors have to take in children either through divorce or just weren't divorced, but couldn't make it on their own in that case. Now, of course, here you have to be 18 and over to stay here and live in a particular dwelling. But one of the things that's now transpiring in that middle generation, someone that has young children, but also older parents, and they have to now take care of the older parents and also their children. That's probably the biggest challenge of all the age groups and all, because they had themselves, which many times, a lot of people don't do real financial planning. And then when they do it, they do what I call needs-based planning. They'll start with a particular need. They'll save for kids' college, but then they forgot about themselves. And then they realize they try to make up for a retirement and all. But that generation has not only a parent, but also young children. And then down to, like you said, even into the 20s now and all. There's a big story I shouldn't say that. Most people don't want to talk about. I've spoken about it. I don't speak from an expertise. I just speak from what I'm hearing and what I'm reading. And that is how artificial intelligence is going to replace a lot of past jobs where a lot of young people, that's how they started to make their careers in it all. And the combination of that and robotics, no one wants to seem to address that. We're still caught up in, look how these stocks are going up and look how they made. Now we're starting to realize that even these data centers they're building, how impactful negative they are environmentally and all. No one fought this out. Yet we're reading where careers where people used to go into and kids went through college and graduated, they're sending out 600-700 resumes, can't get a job. And I'm just wondering how all this automated ways, robotic or artificial intelligence, people say it creates new jobs. I don't see it for the majority of people, how it does better for the typical worker. And so the artificial intelligence problem that I think is going to become acute is really, really critical. And then the last thing, which it impacts all ages, and the youth now are far more involved in it at their age than when we were their age. And that's the involvement in politics. When I was 18 or 25, I didn't think much about politics. Now you'd be surprised of how many, before they can even vote, had political ideas and views and so forth. And of course, the tendency is to be more liberal and open, want to help the world. And then as you get older, you realize that maybe you can't do all those things at all. But the political environment is far more charged now. Here in the U.S., I'm just about to write a story about it because of how I particularly turned to my view on the current president, who I had hoped would do real well, but I think hasn't. But irregardless of that there's no middle ground. We're either on one extreme or the other, and we're not open to hear. Most conferences, Ben, even in financial world, most people don't go to learn. They go to get confirmation of what they already believe. And I knew that because if I spoke at a conference where I wasn't, like if I spoke at a gold conference, and believe it or not, there was times I was negative on gold, I knew I wasn't well received by the audience. Most people didn't give you a hand because, well, you know what, at least I learned something. Well, you just made my opinion even stronger. Get this guy off the stage. But that's how we are at life right now. So I think, as you said, the younger someone is, it's far more challenging now to be 25 or 30 than it was when I was 25 or 30.
I echo that. I feel that. I want to stay on, you mentioned gold, which I know you're such an expert. What is it, 42 plus years now being in the financial world?
Yeah. And if you talk about expertise, we could spend the rest of the next 8 hours telling you how bad and wrong decisions I made, if you like, as well. The 42 years doesn't give me any betterness than somebody that may only has 2 years. The only thing it's given me is experience. And I will tell you, my father had a slogan when I was a kid. He wasn't a smart, wasn't an educated man or anything, but he used to say, once is an experience, twice is a mistake. But there are going to be times where you won't get a second chance. So, uh, fire away. But, just because I have the experience doesn't mean that I'm going to be successful where somebody who has less experience won't.
What lessons would you like to share that you think are valuable for everyone tuning in that are trying to maybe financially educate themselves?
So I believe no matter who walks through my door or what level of income they may have, I say the same thing to all of them, even that we had tens of millions of dollars of players making this money. And it's more acute now than at any other time because of the concerns I expressed earlier, where I believe we're going socially, politically, economically. The first is only spend less than you make. Very hard for people to do to this day. Still spending more. We have people in the United States in surveys who make as much as 300,000 and say they live paycheck to paycheck. And the people making 100,000 go, get me to 300,000. I'll be able to save 200,000 because I'll keep the tendency as we make more money, we spend more money. But that's the first golden rule. Spend less than you make. If you just start there, you're already on the road to a better life, peace of mind, and so forth. The second is now, and this is hard also, no matter what age or income, less is more. You see, there was a time when I had in my mind that if I could just make more money, I could do and have more things. Now, at this point in my life, I could get a bigger home. I could buy even more of a fancier car. But two things stop me. One, I've experienced in the past distress and anger and pain, suffering when it didn't go that way. And I lost millions of dollars. And I don't want to go through that again. But it took me twice to go through that. And like I said earlier, sometimes you don't get even more than one time. But the other thing is, when less is more, you will find that you don't need all the things that you thought you would need. For instance, I meet people that have heavy debt loads that can be still wealthy, but heavy debt loads. But I also know a lot of people that just have debt, period. And then they go on a program of to reduce that debt, a serious one. And I've never had one of them come back and say, Pete, you were all wrong. I reduced my debt, but life is worse. No, life normally becomes better, especially when they become debt free and don't have that headache of that. And right now, the people that push debt, the credit card companies, all they start in college. They start granting it. Here's a card. You can do all these things you want and so forth and so on. And we've grown accustomed to that and all. So less is more for a lot of reasons, including financial. I think because of where I think we're going, I think we need to focus at all levels of life, although younger can tilt a little bit more to the latter part. But right now, capital preservation is more important to me than capital appreciation. I think we need to focus on holding on to what we have and been blessed with versus trying to make multiple of it, especially the older we are. For instance, I'll say to you this, show me a person my age with 5 million and show me somebody at 30 with 200,000. The 200,000 could be more risk oriented only because if they don't do well, they have a lot of time to make it up. That 70-year-old loses a significant part of it. Their whole rest of their life is going to be far challenging, let alone most people want to leave a legacy. Part of our big business is proper estate planning. Most people don't do it till it's too late, by the way, Ben. Most people don't finally come till there's options that used to be available aren't anymore. But you really should start at a younger age, especially if you started to have wealth. But one of the things is a lot of those people want to leave a legacy, whether it's to family members, people, or charities and things of that nature. The earlier you could start on that, prepare for it, the better opportunity you're going to have to do that. But the ultimate one is a slogan that I've used because I learned it the hard way. And the ultimate crime in investing is never being wrong. Here's news for you. Even Michael Gentile and Peter Grandich and Daniel Camboni are going to be wrong at times. The crime is staying wrong and becoming so entrenched. And the way you do that is when pride, which is one of the deadly sins, takes hold, and hubris, to the point where there used to be a period of time, Ben, I would say 2000 and earlier, when I used to read my own public relations stuff and believed I was a legend in my own mind. The market was wrong, not Pete Grandich. So Pete Grandich said a market should do this and it went the other way. How stupid is that market when it was me all along? So pride and hubris is one of the deadly sins, especially in the financial world. And you have to be on guard for that.
Mhm. I appreciate all those lessons, Peter. Um, Something I want to share with you. Obviously, I know you know that you've had impact on my financial education and continuing to learn, and even through these interviews. But I'm a big believer in like the ripple effect. So not only my audience has also been impacted, but even like close friends of mine that I really, really care about have also been positively impacted. And the reason why I'm bringing that up to you is I know even in your life, you've had people, whether it's in finance or whether it's in your faith or whether it's in sports, whatever it was, that have had impact on you. And I know there's three people I want to bring up that I feel you'll appreciate me bringing up. One of them in finance, and I know it's not just finance, also faith, is Michael Gentile. I also know that your wife, Mary, has been someone really, really important part of your life, has really seen you and loved you and just been your rock your whole life. And another one I know is one of your really great friends, Joe Klecko.
So let's start with Michael Gentile. Michael Gentile is not only the smartest person I've ever met in the financial world, although my financial mentor down here, Frank Congelosi, I call him the Michael Gentile of financial planning because what Michael has done in the metals and mining and separate himself, Frank Congelosi separated himself in the world of financial planning. So Michael is just a unique individual, and I seen that even before I got to know how much he was and the commonality we share of our Catholic Christian faith. The second person you mentioned, I would have never got anywhere without her being by my side. And perhaps another type of woman might have left at some point in time too. And she is a person that from the first date to now, she demonstrated her entire belief and trust is in God. And it bothered me early on because she had roommates that took advantage of her. Where she worked, she got took advantage. And my wife has never shown anger, ever, even at the worst things I might have done. Disappointment, yeah, but not anger at all. And her total trust in God, in everything. Even when she was told in the one child we were to have at 5th month of pregnancy, because you know the story, you read the book, the child could have spinal bifida. She took me to a healing mass. I'd never been to one at all. And then I ended up being the catcher and I'm listening to people's prayers. And then I'm the catcher for my wife and her faith in that after that experience. I just thought, oh, this was nice and all, but hey, the doctor tells us we could have a child that has a hole in its back. And she said, no, I was cured. And her faith proved correct. So her was the absolute rock in that. Now, you mentioned Joe Klecko because from the sports world, I got to live, even my business partner to today would get mad because I would meet sports guys and didn't know who they were. And he'd go, do you know who that person is? And all. But one thing I grew up with as a Jet fan with my father, and in this man's playing days, Joe Klecko, my father would say at the TV, if we had 10 more of him, we'd win the Super Bowl. And then the irony was that I would meet him and we would become such great friends that true today. I've spent more time with him than any other human being other than my wife and daughter. But the person not mentioned is perhaps the most important outside of my wife, and even with respect to Michael Gentile, was my dearest friend. And as you can see, I'm going to get choked up now talking about it. Was my dearest and best friend named Bill Wagner. Bill was a man I met in the middle of '90s at the height of my legend in my own mind days. He was a man that was successful in business and then through poor decisions, lost all his money, was not a practicing Catholic since his childhood, came back to his faith and became a full-time, call it Catholic preacher, but what we say in the Catholic community, a Catholic lay evangelist. He wasn't clergic, but he spent full time preaching the gospel, traveling around and doing missions. He would become my absolute best friend with no disrespect to Joe Clucko and others, but he would become a modern day prophet in my view and would teach me and I would learn from him. And I invoke a lot of his teachings into my work and then would die suddenly in 2022. And it would be so severe that I would enter my third and hopefully final battle, depression, and literally lost my will to live. And I miss him today, 4 years removed. I can at least speak about it now. I could not speak this way a year after he had passed away. But I learned how critical and blessed I was to have that. And you talk about best friends. You know, when I went from 5,000 square foot home on 5 acres, 5 racehorses, 2 race cars, had the terrible male addiction at the time called golf, played 5 or 6 weeks, days in a row. The wife said, "Are you going to play golf again?" And I said, "I plan on playing golf every day for the rest of my life." I went from that life to losing most of what we had, move into a 2 bedroom on a 3rd floor condo, get rid of the Lincolns and Mercedes and drive a little Malibu. I didn't learn humble, but I got the HUM down thanks to that. But it sometimes takes, and back to an earlier question you have, it takes more times than not for people to go through a real tough time, many times financially, before they open themselves to a spirituality relationship. That most testimonies that you hear, at least in the Christian world, Protestant or Catholic, are of someone that became so engrossed in their faith, they had a real terrible time. I like to joke, Ben. I know we're getting late here, but I like to add this. I've always joked that you don't normally hear this conversion story. Oh, I just sold my software company for $500 million. One kid's in Wharton, the other kid's in Harvard. We winter in DeBale, we summer in the Bahamas, and I'm worth $500 million. And I found Jesus. It's not normally that. Normally, that person would have to go through a loss of that and all. And maybe if I can close, and if you have another question, I'll take it on a true story. I don't know if I have it in the book. So I once had, when I was in my money management days, so we're talking about in the '90s, one of the Forbes wealthiest 400 people in the world at the time. That's how wealthy this person was. And in the original movie Wall Street, the second one, but the first one with Michael Douglas and all, there's a scene where he's walking along the water early in the morning, talking to his Bennett, the broker. The house in the back was this man's summer home. So after the '90s, and when I lost my first series of money, it's the early 2000s. I'm now living in that little condo, driving that Malibu. I found Frank Congelosi. I'm starting the sports business again. I get invited to this man's youngest child wedding, which is taking place out at that house, the Little League house that you see in the movie, out in the Hamptons in Long Island, a very wealthy, where the wealthy people go. And when we drive there, because I'm in a Malibu and all, even though I'm an invited guest, the guy directing the security said, "Okay, help parks over there." And I go, "No, because I'm in a Malibu. Everybody pulling up is either in a $200,000 car or chauffeur driven or whatever." So we sit at this table and I turn to Mary and I say, "You know, Mary, in this room, other than the help, we're the poorest people here. I mean, it's the who's who." And everything. A guy comes and taps me on the shoulder and say, "You Peter Grandich." And my line back then, Ben, used to be, "Why did you buy a stock that I recommended?" And He says, no, such and such wants to see you. And I go up to like a 10-bedroom home, just beautiful home. I go and open the door, and here's this man. We're just going to call him Mr. A. And Mr. A is weeping like crazy, especially when I walk in. First thing I say is, how come he's not downstairs with his family? His kid just got married. Oh, Pete, I really wanted to. I'm giving you the short version, but I want to talk. What's wrong? And as he starts to try to tell me what's wrong, things are going through my head. Oh my God, he's lost a lot of his money. Is he get cancer or something? Or he's such a, and he basically says, and I'm giving you the short version, Peter, I'll never forget it. You're the luckiest man in the world. And I said to him before I knew the exact story, Ben, I'm the luckiest Carl. I just drove out here in a Malibu. They thought you were a help. I could sell his home and never work again and live off of it. How am I the luckiest man in the world? Oh, you got Tara. And of course, he knew my family because we used to spend time together, married. And my youngest daughter got married. And then he said this, Ben, she got married. I don't know her favorite color. I don't know her favorite thing to do. I don't know the names of her friends. And she's gone. And I can't do anything about it. And and he went into how he was a terrible man and how he would change places with me. And I joked, so let me see it, because he was worth well over $1 billion. I, I said to him, is it worth giving Mary up in Tower for $1 billion? Joking, well, when I drove home, and we have a road here called the Long Island Expressway, it stands LIE, and it is a lie because normally you're at a standstill. Traffic didn't bother me. I was on cloud nine. In fact, Mary said to me, I haven't seen you this happy since we used to live in the big home and all that, because I learned a very valuable lesson then. All the things this man had, he was truly for that day, and I'm sure he went back and I understood that he did kind of his old self. But on that day, if he could have turned in that money to have my life, he was willing to. And that, I think, is one of the greatest lessons and things that I lived to. And it's ironic because that's kind of where, if we looked at the lifespan of me and with it, that was the bottom error for me. Off of that, yeah, still some tough things happened. Off of that, things got better. And that was when I really concluded also that you could have all the money in the world. And that's what Jesus said. But what good is it if you lose your soul? And that's a Bible verse. And it's very, very critical right now for me.
I really appreciate you sharing that story because it makes me reflect that when we take for granted our relationship with ourselves, our relationship with others, our relationship with our communities, those are the things that really, really matter. You can't put a price tag on it at all. Another human, like a daughter or a friend, it really is part of real, real wealth, your social wealth. So I appreciate you sharing that story. There's some reminders there, especially when people get caught in, the busy lifestyle or thinking they have to keep surviving.
Let me just say this to you before we're out of time. The slogan now is, we're all on Wall Street. We're wealth management slogan. We were brokers and we were financial advisors. Now we're wealth managers, wealth management. Someone asked me, sometimes you get this question, well, what separates you from these other people and all? I said, the other people try to make a legitimate ability to handle wealth management in regards to money. Our wealth management is far more than money. In fact, we think if you don't do the other things that we put into our planning and all, it won't matter how much money you have. Some intrigue from that, but others go, oh, this guy's going to try this. I just want to make some money, kind of stuff. So when you hear wealth management, like you were just saying, wealth is so much more than money. And that's what goes back to it. Again, one of my great sayings when Jesus says, what matters if you gain the whole world, but you lose your soul? That was the lesson, that all of that, you've heard this from people that do hospice work. They'll tell you some of the things that the people experience, but even the ones that you read about, and it's all online, who worked with wealthy people, not once did they ever say, I should have just hung around and made more money. I didn't make enough. Look at this, I'm dying and I didn't make, no. They conclude really that the money was the least important thing in their lives, and then regret that they didn't realize that sooner.
Our soul is so important, and it's something that I always reflect a lot, Peter, where I spend my time. I want really meaningful relationships or meaningful conversations like this. And there's actually a question I want to ask you, Peter. You have a great, great heart. Ever since I met you, I saw you wear your heart on your sleeve, and I really have a lot of gratitude for you. But my question that I want to ask you is, who is Peter Grandich?
So I'll give it to you simple. So I don't want you to think I'm trying to cop out. I'll give you it. And then if you want to digress from it, this is what I tell people: a terrible sinner, saved by the grace of Almighty God, and blessed to have been surrounded with people enough to help me be a better person than I would have been on my own. And that's usually the description that I think is enough if people understand what that means. So, A, a sinner saved by grace. So there is sometimes a battle between Protestants and Catholics. Protestants believe if you say a certain saying and all, you're in the book. There's not really anything else to do. It doesn't matter how much good works you do and so forth and so on. You're in or you're out. More in the Catholic faith, it's yes, recognizing that, but uh, without good works, and there's the book of James and others that will demonstrate that that's not the only thing that matters. But a sinner saved by grace. The ultimate recognition in that part of what I shared with you is doesn't matter what you've done. If it wasn't for God, your next breath isn't even coming. I've learned that. Did I believe that at 29 and 30? No, it was me, Pete Grandich. But I know well that none of this, even this ability to continue talking to you, only becomes from the grace and the gift that I believe the King of the universe, the person responsible for everything and anything, has granted me. So that's the other thing. Recognizing when good things have been blessed to you. It's not money. More times it's not, it's going to be people and lessons that you learn from everyday life. You talk about Michael Gentili. Let me respond this way. Michael Gentili, in my estimate, does almost nothing to self-promote himself. Nothing. Nor is he interested to make all his money simply so him and his family can be wealthier. I fully suspect what I've learned about him so far is he will have little or nothing when his day comes and he's called away in himself. So his driving force is not money. Yet he's built a reputation now and is being learned by people to be an expert in a particular field. There is someone else that gets a lot of recognition in that industry who will also be viewed, even maybe by more eyes, because they've been around that much longer than Michael Gentili is. When I know for a fact that person couldn't carry Michael Gentili's bags. End the discussion in that. But because of titles and appearances and all that other stuff and all these credentials that you can make yourself into something that you're really not, that existed. So the answer to you that is it's not the title, it's the person behind the title, the opportunity you have. You didn't feel this way the first time we spoke. You might have had an inkling, but it took several times and all. And that's why you have to give time as an aid. You can't jump to conclusions. I used to watch people, Ben, before, again, because I'm going to have to run soon on you, but I used to watch people go in a conference, not know anybody or anything, and to be an oil and gas mining company. And by the time they left, they gave them $500,000 to go look for oil. Or there's no boat sailing without you. A lot of times people get pressured in that, hey, if you're going to miss this up, but the boat's going to sail without you. In investing, there's only ferries. Trust me, if one boat you miss it, another one's going to come back in to pick you up sooner or later and all. And so I think the other thing is that time, you have an advantage over me now. You have plenty of more time to do what's right and do all the things than I have right now. Now, imagine, if you will, which I'm just gathering from our talkings, I never asked you what. You believe in something afterwards. You believe in some way, somehow, after this human natural life is over, something's going to transpire for you, because you wouldn't be doing what you're doing and all if you didn't, because it would be all or nothing now and all. The saddest part is to think, I think, this is my opinion, that this is it. And as my Wagner friend used to say, Pete, even if it is, what we've chosen is still a better way to live. There's going to be a lot more peace and real enjoyment in it and all. So I don't think you go out and beat your chest and tell people, if you don't know Jesus Christ, you're going to hell. There are some fundamentalists that make that argument and all. That's a pretty cruel God. If God's really that way, just because someone didn't evoke something, then maybe I don't want to go there after all. But I don't think that's it. Problem with that is the Bible, either you have to take all of it or none of it. And I'm going to close on this part, Ben. So I meet people that say, well, if it's not in the Bible, this is basically the process. It's not there. Well, there's nothing in the Bible that says that the Bible's the only source, but we'll take it for granted. The Bible is all the answers and everything. Well, it says in the scripture that if I look at a woman in a lustful or bad way, there's a scripture that says it's better I take my eyes out than continue my life after doing it. There's also scripture that says if I took something that wasn't mine, I stole, it's better I cut off my hand than live that way. Well, what I say to those fundamentalists that says the Bible's the only answer, what I can just tell you is most men I know should have no eyes and no hands because we've done that more than once. Okay. So you can't take everything literally, but you can, after grabbing all of that, compare apples to oranges. How I know that person that I don't want to name is that not only by learning it, but then experiencing Michael Gentili to realize that person can't carry that person's bag. And that's experience. And that goes back to what my father used to say, once is an experience, twice is a mistake. You know, you had to tell a little baby when we had little Tara, we had to put the little clips on so she doesn't go somehow into a closet or she go towards the oven. You go, no, no, too hot. Sometimes a kid had to learn and touch it. And that's how, but they get fortunate enough that they don't get burnt too bad that they get to live another day. Others don't. A lot of people in prison right now made one terrible mistake. Just, bad. If they could do it over, they would. And that's the gift we get, that we get to experience something, learn from it, and then be better for it. And that's what you're doing. You continue, I commend you on this much. You continue to soak in people you've identified and then do something that others don't, share it with others. Man, you can't ask for a more ideal person. And Ben, I don't need to stroke you. I mean, if you never interview me again, I'd be sad that I wouldn't get to see it, but it's not going to change my life. But you're doing something that 9 out of 10 people are not doing. So don't ever get to the point that, wow, look at that person. They're getting more. No, what you're doing here is going to have far more rewards to you than what some other people are doing for themselves.
I really appreciate those words, Peter. It means a lot. It means a lot because even coming in today's conversation, I really just wanted to focus on the human side of you, to feel where the conversation goes, to not force if we don't talk about gold, which I know if people have listened to this point in time, to really hear a lot more wisdom that will be valuable to them.
I will just tell you this. They can go to the X page or something. We spoke about today is worth zillions of dollars worth of gold. And someone will tell you someday, maybe not right away, someone will experience this and in some way say, it helped me do that is far more valuable than telling them where we think gold can go up, down, or sideways.
I totally agree. And that's kind of what lights me up to keep pushing the podcast forward, is out of a place of honesty, integrity, and not doing it for all the wrong reasons, which is, money first or likes first or trend first. It's more just out of place of love and humanity.
So let me just close now on this.
Yeah.
I'm going to tell you how much I appreciated it. And I mean this sincerely when I say it. I don't really want to go anywhere and speak anymore or do anything. But if you put another conference together in Montreal with Daniel Caboni and Michael Gentili, I will come up and join that.
Well, Peter, I'll have to definitely say yes again. Because I know you were keen on doing this last time.
Yeah.
And you know what? Let's set it up. Let's make it happen. So
I give you my word now, barring something unforeseen illness or
yeah,
something. And you say that now at 70, you don't say that at 54,
yeah.
30. But I will come up and I like to bring Mary because Mary loved Montreal the one time I brought her there. And I will come up because what you're doing, and I know from this and potentially that conference to be, it will help someone. And that's what I'm called now to do. I keep saying this is the last thing, but this is going to be the last thing. So years and years ago, when I was in the business 3 years, I made this forecast of a crash. It happened the next day. I said, we're going to be better. A man back then was very famous on Wall Street named Robert Prechter Jr. He's still out there. He still writes a thing called the Elliott Wave Theory and all. But he was treated like a god then because he had forecast a crash and et cetera, et cetera. And he wrote to my company and gave me a letter of recommendation. Didn't really know me, but and just said some fine things that I ended up using in my marketing and all. And a couple of years later, whatever, he wrote again and said, listen, I saw it. That's okay. But remember now, if you get success, pay it forward. That's what I've been doing for years since now. And that's why I'd be willing to come up and do all this because what you're doing, having me on, having a chance for somebody to hear this, paying it forward, part of it would be to come up and be there and everything. Besides, I want to see Gentili's home base. You know, he's a he's an interesting guy. You think about him, 5 girls, part-time money manager, part-time handling his own money, does all these things and is running, perhaps the most important thing to me right now, a fund to spread the word of evangelization. How he has all that time to do that is, I really want to, and I am going to be, I'm actually going to a special thing he's doing with his wife in October. But I wanted, like you said, meet Mary. I want to meet the woman behind Michael
Mm,
because she must be really special too.
absolutely. Yeah. Well, Peter, I just want to say, again, I appreciate everything. And I am happy. I love bringing people together. I love planning events. So I'd be happy, maybe not right now this summer, but I'd be happy to put something on, but on one condition that we do it for charity. Any of the funds that is raised, we
Yeah.
can come to a common agreement between Michael, yourself, Daniela, and I. And the other thing too is I would love to, so that we can make it an extreme valuable opportunity for those who come. I'd love to also get your feedback as well as Danielle and Michael of what are the most important topic points to talk about to make it really, really tremendous. And also from all four of our minds.
Okay. So when the NHL schedule comes out, the 2026, 27, look to see when the New Jersey Devils are playing Montreal in Montreal. And
Peter, that's not going to go well.
if you want to hope to absolutely make sure I get there, I will definitely travel, snow, whatever, to see the Devils play in Montreal. I'm a big hockey fan. I'm a big Devils fan. The color commentator for them is a good friend of mine, and that would just be another reason to go and do it and all. But it doesn't have to be. I'm there no matter what date you pick.
Awesome, Peter. Well, I'll say again, thanks for being here today and appreciate you.
Same here, my friend. God bless.